Thank you to everyone that has joined us, and good afternoon to you from wherever you're based. It's joining us for this Thriving from the Start Network event, which I'm really looking forward to. We're here to talk about developing critical wellbeing skills for career success. To introduce myself, I'm Farimah Darbyshire. I am from the Mind Forward Alliance. We are a workplace mental health organisation, a not-for-profit, and we oversee the running of the Thrive from the Start network. And the network, which is organised the event today, is a mental health network for young professionals, which was set up by young professionals back in 2019, which is for young professionals and which is actually run by young professionals. So we have a committee of young professionals who determine everything that happens within the network. And the aim is to provide practical tips, guidance, and a community where young professionals or people who are about to go into their career can feel supported and get to know each other and talk about well-being, which is a critical part of anyone's career. If you're not already subscribed and signed up to our network, and we'll post how you can do that in the chats if it hasn't already happened. But on to the topic today. So critical well-being for career success. And this might not be something that has featured prominently in your training, in your inductions so far, but it is a really important part of developing your career and actually sustaining a career in the future. If you speak to many people who are a bit further on in their career, senior people, a lot of them say that this is something that they wish they'd spent more time on at the start of their career. And I would be one of those people. Because managing your well-being in the context of the workplace is an important part of career success. This includes the ability to recognize stress early on before it becomes chronic, communicate well and constructively about it, set boundaries, recover from setbacks, recover from busy periods, and ask for support when you need it. All essential professional skills. And look, many of the coping strategies that we will have developed in education at school, university, at college, those fast bursts of activity, maybe just dealing with it on your own, some of those ways of, or the support that you had, that's not there anymore. And the coping mechanisms you developed don't maybe sit well in a workplace where you have lots of different stakeholders and lots of different short, medium, and long-term deadlines. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. I know that starting a career is an incredibly exciting time for people, and there are new opportunities, incredible sense of opportunity, incredible sense of achievement, but it can also be a time of pressure with a period of significant adjustment and new stresses, not just within the workplace, but outside of the workplace, with leaving maybe community that you lived in, living with new people, financial well-being. So it's just to say that if you feel overwhelmed and there's a lot going on, you are not alone. And it's one of the reasons that Thriving the Start Network was set up, actually. And recent research from Deloitte said that nearly half of Gen Z employees in the UK, that's 49%, said they felt stressed or anxious all or most of the time. And another 2025 study said that 1 in 4 people were feeling stressed because of workload. So in today's session, we're going to hear from a couple of brilliant contributors who are, I think, going to help us develop our thinking on this. We're going to hear from Mimi Bullivant, who is a recently qualified solicitor and an associate solicitor at Linklaters, and Roz Shafran, who's Emeritus Professor of Translational Psychology at UCL and clinical psychologist. And we will be hearing their professional expertise, personal experience, and insights. And I will also be finishing off our session by talking about how to have conversations in the workplace about mental health and well-being. And my hope is that you leave today feeling more confident, that you can understand why managing well-being is an important part of professional success and career progression, and why it should be a priority and we should be thoughtful and mindful about it. Recognize signs of stress and anxiety in yourself and others around you. Learn practical strategies to support your well-being and resilience, particularly in the context of the workplace and particularly at this stage of your career, and just feel more confident about having conversations about well-being in the workplace, which can be quite sensitive. It can make you feel quite vulnerable, but in a constructive way. There will be time for the questions at the end. As we've said, please do pop those in the Q&A function and we'll get to as many as we can. I will try and finish this session by 2:45, 2:50, give you a bit of time back before your next meeting, which I'm sure will start at 3 o'clock. But without further ado, I'm going to get on and introduce you to Mimi. Hi, Mimi.
Hi, Farimah.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't we just kick off by why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and the work that you do?
Yes, so I am a newly qualified solicitor at Linklaters, which is an international law firm. I did a 2-year training contract with Linklaters prior to qualifying back into the private equity team in September at the end of last year. So it's my first probably like 6 to 8 months being in this slightly newer role and a bit more senior role. And it's kind of been a learning process because I don't know if everyone's aware, but international law firms are very high pressured, high intensity, like long hours, like big expectations. And so it's kind of an adjustment to be thrown into that at all times and kind of have lots of expectations
Mm,
thrown upon you. So it's quite helpful to be in part of this discussion and kind of say how I've seen people cope with it, but also how I cope with it myself.
brilliant, thank you. Well, congratulations, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Well, why don't we just dig into a little bit of what you've just said about those adjustments
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about? So, can you tell us a little bit about the experience that you've had and any kind of what have been any triggers for stress or anxiety or anything that's negatively impacted your well-being over the last few years? What have been the pinch points?
Yes, I think there's a couple of key pinch points in my career so far, and I guess looking like quite specifically, there are these transaction deadlines, which, signings, closings, or just key milestones within transactions that I've been working on, where everyone in your deal team is very, very highly stressed. There's, limited sleep is happening. There's high demands. There's lots of expectations on you from external clients, but also internal partners, more senior people. Um, and so I guess there's that, and there's kind of trying to manage that in the everyday sense, but then also, as mentioned, being part of this international law firm with very high expectations, a lot of pressure at all times, and kind of a expectation that you will be performing at a very high level
Hmm.
consistently. There's I guess that can bring quite a lot of stress just on a day-to-day basis. I think some people in my team or some people in this firm feel stress as a regular baseline thing just because of the environment which we're in, which can be positive in that it kind of encourages you to do really well and it drives people to be successful. But I think also there can be times when it gets too much, and that's I think where we need to think about appropriate coping strategies, but also how it can be escalated as a junior within like the team.
Yeah, yeah, good point. And I think that's a really interesting point. I think Roz is going to come and talk to you about that a bit later, but it's that idea that stress in of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing and it can actually drive you to do good work. But there does come a point at which we need to recognize, or the firm needs to recognize that it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not looking for a completely de-stressed environment here. We know we've got a lot of ambitious people on this call, but how can we get that balance right? So that's interesting. So what is it, how have you learned to recognize when you are starting to feel stressed and anxious and when you're tipping over into this isn't positive stress anymore. How
Mm-hmm.
have you learned to recognize it in yourself, or have you recognized it in others around you? Because you did come in with a big cohort of other
Yeah.
young professionals.
Yeah, so my cohort, there's probably about 40 or 50 of us. So it's quite nice in that we have a peer group to support each other. In terms of like recognizing stress, I think when you can start to feel yourself, I think everyone has a baseline level of perhaps like stress, like coming to work. I know there's a lot of things I need to do that day, but that doesn't normally stress me out. But if it gets to the next level where I almost feel like panicked in that I can't start my tasks, or I just don't really know what to do with myself, I think that's when I feel that I'm like hitting a stress level which I need to consider and think about. And I think in terms of dealing with that, for me, the first thing is to kind of acknowledge it and be like, yes, I'm feeling a bit stressed, like, and then I need to start like pulling out my tools as to overcome the stress. And I think perhaps 2 points on this is what's really helpful in this kind of collegiate environment. I know there's a lot of grad schemes out there, is that you are in a cohort of peers, and actually not only being able to recognize it in yourself, but if you can see that someone else is stressed, sometimes just being able to say, hey, you've got a lot on your plate, like that'd be really stressful if it was me. Like even just having that validation that someone else also thinks it's stressful, and it's not like not just you're not having imposter syndrome, like it is a genuinely stressful situation. I think
Hmm.
that in itself can kind of like, you can champion your own stress by kind of being like, yes, this is stressful, but now I need to think about how I can manage it. And then I guess the second point is kind of timing. Like there's, as I said, there's kind of maybe a baseline level of stress that you might have in your job just from, wanting to do well, there's being a lot on. And then there's a point of stress where it's becoming so much that you're unable to be successful or unable to achieve the things that you want to do in your day to day. And when it gets to that point where you're starting to feel a bit, it's verging towards burnout, or you're feeling almost like immobilized by the stress, then I think that's when you need to be able to recognize in yourself that this is the time where you actually need to escalate it beyond like any kind of helpful tools that you can do yourself to either your manager or just someone more senior in the team, and maybe they can help with strategies for overcoming stress, redistributing the workload, because sometimes you might just have too much on your plate. And also just like reprioritization. Sometimes it seems like everything is required for in 1 hour's time, you are just one person, and sometimes you just need someone who's external to you, especially as a junior, to be like, actually XYZ is really important, you do need to do that by this time, but the rest can follow a bit later. But sometimes it just requires that kind of third party to be able to take the load off you. And I think as a junior, it looks quite impressive if you're able to be like, I have XYZ on my plate, I'm feeling quite overwhelmed because I know it all needs to be done by X date. Is there anything that you can do to help me prioritize, or what do you think is the most important, or can we share this piece of work with someone else? And I mean, I did the same thing today. I had a lot on my plate, and I've just, spoke to my team and said, I can do this, but I think this one is going to be needed to like move off my plate because I just don't have time to do it in the time frame. And people always think that just looks like you're very well put together and you are really thinking about like the deliverables to the client, but rather than just kind of sitting there trying to get everything done and not doing everything as well and not meeting deadlines.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think that's great. And I think it is a sign of maturity. And that's why we were talking about it as a skill. It's one of the skills. There's a lot that goes into managing stress at work and preventing burnout. But one of the skills is in recognizing that getting your head down and doing it yourself as you would for revising for an exam is not the way to go about it. And actually managing your well-being and managing your workload and asking for help are all important strands that go into sustainable high performance. Because without that, you're not going to be sustainably high performing. And it's just getting the confidence. Because I know at the start of my career, I was very much like, I'm going to be judged if I asked for help. But actually, that's not what we're looking for.
Agree. And I think it's just a change in mindset from when you're a student and you're studying, you're in a very like insular, it's just you, and how much work you put in is kind of what you get out. When you come and join like, a team, or you're getting your first job, you have to kind of shift your mindset to realize that you're actually part of a team. And there are levels of escalation in terms of if you need help and support, you can actually escalate things better. But also people can pick up the work if you are in a group and it's not just you anymore. And I think that does take a couple of months even just to like realize that not everything's going to be down to you to get things done, and that fundamentally can't happen in the workplace. But it does take, I think it took me at least a couple of months to realize that I don't actually need to be doing every single thing, because that's not how it works anymore.
Yeah. You've covered off a little bit about this already, but what else helps you to manage stress and anxiety that's brought on by work and stops you from going towards burnout?
So I think thinking about that example where I spoke about when there's like a specific deadline and it's quite like there's a lot of things to be done by a certain date, and that's like that quite specific example of stress. For me, I'm a very visual person. I like to have a very, if it's a long list, I like to have a very long list, and I like to start ticking things off, even if it's like the smallest item is on that list and I get to tick it off. That for me feels like I'm making progress, and that feels like I've got everything under control and I can see what I need to do, and there's like a path forward. So that's really helpful. I also think sometimes just taking 5 minutes, whether it's just to like sit and breathe and just be like, okay, I can do this, and kind of like, boost yourself up, or whether it's just taking a walk outside and getting some fresh air, because I feel like a lot of people sit in these offices all day and forget that we can go outside. That also is a good reset, and then I can come back and I can actually be more focused for the time that I'm working. And then I guess more generally in this kind of stressful career that I've chosen, it's about carving out time for things that I like to do to relax. So exercising, sometimes that be it in the morning, because sometimes my evenings can be taken up by work, seeing friends and family, and like making sure that I'm doing things that I really enjoy on the weekend when I have a bit more like free time. And then also I think everyone always talks about the importance of sleep. And I think this is something that I'm still working on, because I'm a bit of I think they call it a bedtime procrastinator, where you kind of get into bed and really you should be like winding down for the evening and going to sleep. But I like to spend a lot of time on my phone because I haven't been on my phone all day. So that's something I still need to work on. I think you can kind of tell, but there's always like a work in progress in terms of management of stress. But for me, like, I think sleep is the key, but I'm still working on getting better at sleeping so that I have like more
Yeah.
chilled daytime.
You and about 30% of the population, Mimi.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now and we're going to hear some practical guidance and some practical tips and just some theory from Professor Roz Shafran. Hi, how are you, Roz?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to you now, but you're going to just help us think about how we can recognize and manage different types of stress that impact us at work, including and importantly, recognizing the difference between healthy and unhealthy coping. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Hopefully people can see those slides. Okay,
Yep, got
great.
it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I really appreciated hearing your experience, Mimi, because I think a lot of what you said is very relatable, no matter what the context. And you can think globally from all the different people on the chat and all the different organizations that have joined today. And I think some of the themes that you've spoken about will come up in this too. And not all stress is bad, that's already been covered, but our tolerance for that stress differs. And I think there's already a question in the chat about somebody being a new parent, which we'll come to in the question session. So things that you can cope with before you're a parent now become very difficult, not just because of the sleep, because of the time limitations. So it's obviously a positive stress for most people being a parent, but it's just hugely different, and having to adjust to those different circumstances is challenging. And when we were planning this, we thought there can't be a person alive that doesn't know about the stress bucket. But just in case you don't, this is the idea that stress flows into your bucket, and sometimes there's more stress than others that's flowing in due to external pressures. But what we do and what we have control over is the tap to release the stress. So Mimi, in your example, it would be the exercising, the going outside. Those are the kind of things. And I guess part of today is about not waiting till the bucket overflows, but anticipating when the bucket might overflow so that you can actually tolerate it and manage it on a more stable basis rather than sort of lurching from crisis to crisis. And I think it's helpful to think about stress in different ways. So there's acute stress, which is the deadline, the client, they've got to do it, got to do it. Mimi, it sounds like there's, quite a lot of your sort of really acute, this has to be done, I can't do it in the next hour, etc. That's sort of really acute stress. And that stress is sort of on top of the sort of a general level of chronic stress, perhaps. And the chronic stress that you've talked about in terms of expectations or perceived expectations, in terms of managing the things in our lives that do go on outside work, managing relationships at work that might be a chronic stress. And I think it's brilliant if you're in a team and you can sort of delegate it to people and work with people, but I guess sometimes that doesn't always happen, and there are sort of difficulties within teams that could be regarded as a chronic stress. And then the sort of acute stress, it's not just a one-off, right? It's the next contract, the next deliverable that there is. And so it's sort of this sort of period of acute stress, chronic stress, and episodic kind of coming and going. And then this idea of positive stress as well. So even in terms of a practical thing, going away from today or thinking about it now, identifying what are your acute stresses, what are your chronic stresses, what of those acute stresses are likely to recur, and what would you label and identify as sort of more positive stress. So even differentiating them can be helpful in terms of being able to manage the stress in your bucket. This is hopefully a familiar curve as well to people, and we've talked about it. It's the sort of Yerkes-Dodson stress performance curve. And the title of this slide is Spotting and Managing Stress is Central to Career Development. And I think that's really the key theme for today. And Mimi, when you're talking about actually it's regarded positively for you to be able to anticipate your workload. So instead of saying, I haven't got it done, being able to think, I'm not going to get it done. And that really is respected. And this is a helpful sort of idea that if you do little work, you're not going to do very well. Okay, that sort of from school, the effort you put in is manifest in some kind of an output. And this sort of positive, productive, healthy tension, energizing, adrenaline, go, go, go. I doubt many of you are sort of inactive much of the time because there's always something to do, and it sort of increases your attention and your interest. And then you can have a peak performance. And I think we can all recognize in ourselves when we're sort of on a high, on a buzz, and it's happening. And that's great. But it very easily can tip into too much. And when it tips into too much, it impacts performance. So when the demand is excessive, or the stress is, when you are tired, and I think I'm surprised it's only 30% of us that scroll on our phones when we know we should be going to bed. I think it's very common, but actually then how do you know, yeah, a bit of, I'm going to do that. That's what I like to do. I give myself permission to do that. But when can I build that into my schedule so that I'm still also going to sleep on time, rather than kind of kidding ourselves that actually tonight I'm going to put my phone away. So thinking that when it tips off, it tips over, it sort of becomes fatigue and exhaustion, burnout and so on. And that's why spotting it early, managing your stress actually is central to doing well. And I think it's about, for me, it's then thinking about how you can work smarter, not harder. Right. So the people on this call, the people in these in your jobs, you're doing well, you know how to work, but are you working as efficiently as you can be? Can you work smarter by managing your stress and thinking, actually, I'm going to really focus on my peak performance and doing it well within that sort of yellow-orange zone, rather than tipping over into the sort of burnout, anxiety, and stress zone. And I guess while you're right, Mimi, there are these sort of massive external stresses and expectations. And I heard you say expectations quite a lot. They're these expectations. And some of those expectations are expectations. This is the job. This is what you're paid a lot to do. This is what we expect of you. But some of those expectations might be internal rather than external expectations. What you expect of yourself, or what you think that the firm expects of you, as opposed to what it really does. And these are some really well recognized kinds of thinking styles or errors, or whatever you would like to call them, that can increase the stress and our stress, so that when you've got this external pressure, it amplifies it. So there's sort of an interaction between your internal way of thinking and then the sort of perceived external pressure that you're under. And so these are good kind of early warning signs to think about. All or nothing thinking, black and white thinking. If I don't do this well, then I may as well not bother. If I can't do it properly, I'm not going to bother at all. It's better not to do it than to do something half-hearted. If it's not going to be my best work, I'm not going to do it. And it is a very different way of working in this sort of time-limited way, I think, in the job market, which is you have a certain amount of time to get something done. Could you do it better if you had longer? Probably. But where is the kind of good enough? Is it better to get it done not perfectly than to not get it done at all? So I think if you're someone that's inclined to that kind of perfectionism, or it's got to be the best that I can possibly do, every piece of work needs to be my best, being able to differentiate between important priorities and whether or not it's better to get something done not brilliantly but get it in, or whether or not it's better to ask for an extension. Those are judgments. But if you're inclined to all or nothing thinking, then I think that's something to watch out for. Now, if I could read people's minds, that would be great. But we think we can. We think that we know what our managers are thinking. We think we know what other people are thinking. We think we know what the person on the train might be thinking. But we don't. And if you're somebody that is inclined to be concerned about the judgment of others, you might be mind reading. They really expect this. Have they said that? Do other people expect that? So again, an early warning sign for stress is thinking whether or not you're mind reading and thinking whether or not you might be overgeneralizing. So actually, I don't know if anyone here might have handed in something or done a piece of work that just wasn't their best and they got some negative feedback. I don't know, ever had negative feedback, anyone on this call?
A few times.
A few times, occasionally. It happens to us all. And then it becomes overgeneral. So instead of this piece of work, the feedback from this work is you could have done this or you could have done that. You overgeneralize it to I'm terrible, all my work is terrible. They're thinking this. So they sort of all interact. And what you filter out, which is the next sort of stressful thinking style, is you filter out the positives. So whilst you may have got, that's a really great piece of work that you did, it could have been improved if you'd have done this, or I think it would have been better that, what you go home with and what you ruminate over is what you didn't do and not the positives. So it's a very small thing, which I think is, and there may be some cultural differences here in telling this to do it, but write down the positives and the positive feedback you get. If you want to write the negative down too, you can, but don't forget the positives. Catastrophizing is good for mathematicians amongst you in terms of working out the probability. So the idea is that you think, I've done this piece of work, I've got this negative feedback, that means they're not going to give me the next piece of work. That means I'm not going to get promoted. And if I'm not promoted, then it means I'm going to fall behind and then I won't be able to move to another firm because they'll have this really bad reference and so on and so forth. And the trick to there is try and get some sort of objective kind of probabilities in there in terms of this has to happen, multiply it, and this has to happen, multiply it, and this has to happen. And what you find is the probability of all of those things happening is actually pretty slim. So try to catch yourself from catastrophizing. I don't know if anyone thinks they've handed in something and they're tired and they're stressed and they haven't slept and they're hungry and they haven't been outside. You then can be inclined to engage in emotional reasoning, which is, I think, I feel so stressed, it must be awful. I feel so stressed, I must not be coping. So just be aware of emotional reasoning and not inferring an objective state from your subjective state. Some people are very good at blaming others. Some people are very good at blaming themselves when things don't go well. Watch out for that, because it's probably sort of somewhere again in between the two. And being able to label your stress is important. This is stress. It's not a reflection of the reality. I'm not actually stressed. I'm hungry. I'm not actually angry. I'm hungry. I'm not actually feeling really sad. I'm just feeling really tired. So actually, sometimes our emotions can all get mixed up together. And accurate labeling of your emotions is important. I've really rushed through these just because we're really limited for time. But there's so many sort of good resources on these areas and things that you can do to try and help yourself spot these early warning signs of stress in terms of changes in particular to your thinking. But sometimes perhaps it's easier to recognize these early warning signs of stress from your behavior, and definitely in terms of other people, from other people's behavior, if you're looking out for it in others. So we talked a bit about avoidance already, Mimi, that happens, and procrastination that can happen, ignoring problems, negative self-talk, overworking. Whether or not you're overworking or your working's excessive, it's very context dependent, and it might depend on whether or not it's acute stress or chronic stress. But if you are working harder, more consistently, longer than others in your cohort, then that is also an early warning sign. And Mimi, that brings you back to your point about using your cohort, not just to sort of validate, but also as a source of information, I think. Oversleeping, overreacting, underreacting, smoking, drinking, substance abuse, these are not healthy ways of coping, and changes in behavior But also negative self-talk. I'm pathetic. If you hear someone going, I'm just so pathetic, I couldn't do it. I'm just useless. I'm terrible. I don't deserve this. Those are all signs that somebody perhaps is not coping optimally. And then, of course, we have the healthy ways of coping too. So practicing gratitude. It sounds really trivial, but it can really make a big difference. And doing it when you're on your commute, it's easy just to put it on your notes. What am I grateful for? Looking at photos of your pet, spending time with a pet. Mimi, you talked about breathing, and we'll come to breathing again. Most of you are breathing, but are you breathing in a way that can really help de-stress? Noticing even the rain. It's been rainy here today in London. I don't know if it's rainy where you are, or it's sunny, or it's cold, but the fact that we can appreciate the different temperatures and the changes in the seasons. Cleaning is there. Cleaning is something that's actually a healthy coping behavior. If you're overwhelmed and your environment is very cluttered, taking that time to clean it can really restore that sense of control. Art, drawing, all the things you used to do that perhaps you've given up doing because your job is so pressured and stressful. 5 minutes of doing it can help you move on that curve from the red zone to the orange zone. It's not a waste of time. It's not a luxury. It's not an indulgence. It's what you need to succeed. And just trying to remember that as you're doing it. It's an investment in your career. It's an investment in your productivity to take some time to do these sorts of things. And that's what the research evidence shows time and time again across different contexts. Flexibility, though, I think it was interesting to already come up. Your coping strategies from school and how you did things in school differed from university, differed from one role, differed from this role, might differ from project to project. So having a range of strategies. So for example, you might really like to exercise and that's your main coping mechanism. But if you're sent abroad or you can't, for whatever reason, the hotel doesn't have it all the time, have a backup so that you have different coping strategies for different situations. So having more than one is going to be really helpful, and being able to work hard when the time requires it, but not work hard when it doesn't. That is what's going to give you the edge. Okay, here's another top tip. So just breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Just slow it down. Nobody notices, nobody knows, but it gives you back that sense of control. If you've got the thinking styles, you recognize them, you want to really be able to intervene. In my head, I've got a song that has stop in it, but if you are a Frozen fan and you have Let It Go, you can do that. You can personalize this, but whatever you're going to do, if you notice your mind running away with you, then you want to interrupt it. You can do the breathing, but just stop. Take a step back, even one deep breath, and just focus on what's going on in your body, what's going on in your mind. You are stressed. Your bucket has overflowed with that last demand, okay? And your heart is racing and you haven't eaten and it's just too much. And then think about how you want to proceed. Are you going to say, take Mimi's way of saying, actually, I'm not going to be able to get this done. Can you help me prioritize? Can you say, I can get this done, but I can't do it well? What solution are you going to focus on? But the solution that you focus on and the action that you take, it's going to be better if you're not running away with your mind and your body. If you can actually do it from a calmer place, it will help you problem solve and it will help you communicate your needs better because it's not all this sort of manic rush. And this is my favorite that's underused, underutilized, but in psychological research, it's in treatment for all sorts of difficulties, depression and anxiety and eating problems. It really is about effective problem solving. And you guys are such high achievers, you're probably really, really good at it. But you can apply those skills to your stress, and you can apply those skills to your career, and you can apply those skills for how you balance all the different challenges that you have in your personal life, in your work life, in your ambition, in all kinds of things that you want to do. So being able to balance those by, if you look up problem solving, you'll find it identifying the problem, defining the problem, exploring solutions, acting on strategies, and looking at effects. And the common theme from all of this is just taking a step back, writing it down, and being able to be more objective rather than swallowed up in the quicksand. Oh, I didn't have my clock, so I'm not sure if I've stuck to time.
That's great.
Okay, and if there are any questions, we're going to come to have a question section at the end. So,
Fab.
thank you.
Roz. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And I mean, I recognize a bit of myself in there, the catastrophizing and leaping to like the worst possible outcome is something I can do. But I also enjoyed a bit of box breathing. I do know it, but it is amazing how box breathing can help you. But thank you for all those other pieces of advice, and we will send these out as a follow-up for anyone that needs it, that wants to have a look at it again. I'm going to talk very briefly about how we can start to take control before we move to Q&A of conversations. I've already seen a few questions come into the Q&A box, so thank you very much for that. But take control and have conversations about your well-being, about situations at work, particularly in the context of feeling under stress and pressure. But also potentially if you're working in a difficult team or there are difficult team dynamics. And look, in high-performing, fast-paced environments in which is a landscape in which you are relatively new and still working out the lay of the land, it can be understandable that it can be sometimes hard to find space, words, and confidence to admit that you need help and you want to reprioritize, that you're not doing your best. But actually, as Mimi was saying earlier, and Roz has pointed to, this is an important part of developing in our careers, and it's something that we all need to learn to do. And to be honest, I think that everyone could do a better job of practicing it, no matter what stage of their career they're at. Suffering in silence is not good for you, though. It's not good for your job, your career, and it's not what the business wants. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share some practical tips and advice just to help us take control, identify and articulate how you're feeling, and have some constructive conversations, and with the appropriate person in the business. And what I'm going to say, a lot of it is common sense, but I think it's worth going over common sense and the basics in the context of having a conversation where you're maybe feeling a little bit vulnerable and you're maybe talking about things that are a little bit sensitive, that you're struggling. The best person to talk to would normally, in these situations, it will vary within your business, but it would normally be a line manager. But if this is not right, there are other people that you could maybe talk to. If it's particularly about your well-being, if there's a mental health champion or mental health first aider within your business, they can help. They'll be trained to help. Going directly to HR, there may be a buddy system in place. Is there someone who's maybe a few years above you who you've been paired with? Or it might be that there's another manager in the business that you can speak to. It will depend on the problem and the challenge that you're looking at solving, and it'll also depend on what you have around you. But we'd recommend line manager, but we recognize that there may be other people you need to talk to. I think when talking to someone and thinking about the conversation, thinking about having it may generate difficult feelings, and there's a wide range of feelings that you might be feeling. So you may be feeling anger or frustration that you can't solve this on your own. You may be feeling anger or frustration that people around you haven't noticed that you need help, and why do you even have to have this conversation? Fear of possible consequences of asking for help, feeling that it won't make a difference. Recognize all of these things, but the important thing is to not let these feelings, which are completely normal and natural, be a barrier for you to speak up and take action and make you more likely to thrive. Secondly, when having the conversation, plan. Don't kind of go into it cold. Plan what you want to say. take time to think about the conversation, make it as constructive as possible. Maybe's kind of given an example. I've got this, this, and this on my plate. I have these deadlines. Which should I prioritize? What should I do? Is there something that I can hand off to somewhere else? So before the conversation, ask yourself questions of what realistically do I want to achieve and what is the desired outcome for me that I want to get. And that could be additional support or asking, or it could be talking about a particular team dynamic that's not working, but just go in being very clear so you can get the most out of it. I would always write things down as well, because in the heat of the moment or in the moment, you might forget. So to get the most out of the conversation, make sure you do that. Also think about how much of your own personal experience, if it's sensitive, it's about your well-being, how much do you want to share in advance, just so you go in feeling you'll feel more confident if you know what you want to share. Thirdly, and this is important, think about when and where you schedule a conversation. Don't have it 10 minutes before a team meeting that you might have to quickly wrap it up and then start it again another time. Make sure you allow time for it and allow space. Don't kind of do it in the middle of the office floor. Find a room, or if you're doing it online, make sure that you yourself are somewhere private, or maybe take it off site, having a coffee off site. And those are the main things that I would be thinking about going into it. I do just want to share a couple of slides just very quickly. We're just going to bring up some slides to give you practical examples of what you can say. So when you're talking about your well-being, be prepared to hear just, I'm not going to read through all of them, but I to be as helpful as we can, we want to just give some particular phrases that we know have worked in the past, but as I've said before, be clear and explain what's going on and how it's affecting you. So, for example, I've been finding it challenging to manage the different priorities I have at work right now. I really want to do a great job, but I sometimes struggle to know what should come first. I'm worried that if I ask for guidance, it might come across as if I don't want to take on the work, which isn't the case at all. So it's having a clear, you've outlined the problem, you've outlined your fears, and then the next thing is maybe share how the situation is impacting your productivity or your mental well-being. Again, we talked about how much do you want to share, but do you want to be honest and say if you find yourself waking up at night worrying, that's completely fine. Go in being ready to say that. Or, talk about how it's impacting your work. I'm finding it difficult to focus and maintain my usual performance. So here's just some helpful phrases to give you the language to have those conversations. We move on to the next slide. Be ready to discuss potential solutions and keep the conversation solutions focused. You may have your own ideas about what you'd like to happen, but also be ready to listen to suggestions or collaborate on finding an alternative, and recognize and acknowledge that your manager might need the time to find out and consider the options that are available. So I'm not going to read through all of these. I want to allow time for questions at the end, but the important things are be as clear as possible about what you would like to happen, as an example. Potential solutions may be things that you can do yourself with agreement with your manager, or they may be things your manager can do or influence, or it might be that the manager needs to defer to others. But be creative and the kind of solutions that you think might and ask them to be creative for the kind of things that might help you in this challenging situation. And also, a lot of you will work in workplaces that have brilliant resources. So make sure that you ask about what's available. I'm now going to move on to Q&A. And sorry, final point. There may be times that you feel that you're struggling and that you want help and you want help with your mental well-being. Here are some resources. Maybe take a screenshot if this is helpful. Again, we'll send it out after. If you do want to have a conversation about your well-being, asking for help is a strength. And so here are just some places that we would recommend that you get in touch with. Thank you. So I'm going to come to the Q&A. And please do pop them in the chats or in the Q&A box for me. One question that's come through is around addiction and resources around, because addiction can be a way that it can either exacerbate stress, or it can be a way in which you try to cope. It's developed from having tried to cope with stress. I, off the top of my head, don't know of any resources, but we will put that in the follow-up email. I'll make a note of doing that in the follow-up email. Someone's just asked if you can get a copy of the slides after this session. That should be fine. You'll also be a copy of this recording as well. Another question that's come through is, what's the role of the organization in this? And I'll open it. I'll answer this first, but I'll also allow the other contributors to answer. So one thing that I think is important to note when we talk about managing stress is that in the workplace, it is not all on you. It is important. It's a combination of the workplace having a responsibility and you having and us as employees having a responsibility. So today we've been talking about how can we be constructive, how can we take control, how can we manage our own stress. But that doesn't mean that you're doing this in isolation. It's obviously, and the Mind Forward Alliance, which oversees the network, our job is to help businesses work in a way and build their businesses in a way that support the mental health and well-being of their people. So if you're working in a business that needs help on that front, please do get in touch. We'd be love to help your business do that better. But we absolutely recognize, and it should be a priority. And the businesses we work with, it is a priority for senior leadership. Senior leadership should be setting the tone. They should be challenging stigma. They should be creating psychological safety. They should be leading by example, not answering their phones on annual leave and setting boundaries. So we absolutely aren't saying that it's up to you and people as an individual to fix this all themselves. But today we have been focused on what are the skills that we need. But it is absolutely the responsibility of a workplace as well. And then another question has been, sorry, before I move on, Mimi and Roz, did you have any comments on that? Apologies, I did say I was going to throw it out to you. Do you have any thoughts about?
I guess from my perspective, the key is that in order to have like a long and successful career, then you need to be able to manage your stress. And as Farimah has already said, the onus is on maybe you to speak out, because as Roz said, the people aren't mind readers. So if you are feeling the stress, then maybe it's on you to make the first step. But as soon as you have raised that you are feeling the way that you're feeling, it's definitely on your company, your firm, your senior, your line manager to consider how they can help you in the environment. Because for them, they've invested a lot of these grad schemes, a lot of like firms invest a lot of time and money in their employees, either through training or just generally. And so they want to retain the talent that they have. And so in order to do that, they need to make sure that people are happy in the environment that they're working in and are not so stressed that they're going to burn out. I think burnout is a big issue that they face, at least in like the legal career, for example. And I know that a lot of people in my team specifically have raised issues about being so stressed that they feel like they're going to head towards burnout. But it's actually been quite refreshing to see how the seniors have been dealing with it. Like they understand it, they acknowledge it. They want, as I said, they want to retain like the top talent. And in order to do so, they need to make sure that they're not just going to burn out and leave the field, leave the profession. And so I actually think it is like the firms, companies are doing quite a lot in order to try and manage and help with people's stress and burnout. But I do think that sometimes the first step is still on the individual, just because, as Ross said, people aren't mind readers. So people don't necessarily, like, especially if you're good at hiding your stress levels, sometimes it's not always easy for other people to identify that you are stressed. But I do think it's definitely a two-way street.
Thank you, Mimi. Roz, do you have anything to add before we move on?
Nothing to add to that, but I think the one about sounds like a bit of gaslighting going on for the one about how does one cope with workplace stress when working with difficult individuals, making as if you are the one being difficult. And I think that's where problem solving really comes in, and defining the problem really precisely as and one of you'll come up with all kinds of options of what to do there, and I would use a problem solving approach personally.
That's so
problem.
Yeah, so just to give so there was a question that came to us about working, what do you do if you're working with difficult people? Thank you, Ross, that's helpful. I was going to come to that question next, but that's really helpful. Thanks for answering that. Another question is, it's hard to proceed with good resolutions. Noticing the early warning signs of stress, but sometimes, and you have good resolutions, how do you set yourself to notice when you need to execute? When do you turn on that healthy tap, the healthy coping mechanisms? How do you set yourself to notice and set that for yourself so you kick in? I mean, personally, and Roz, I'm going to hand over to you on this, but for me, I try to do it as soon as I feel a little bit stressed, so it becomes a habit, so it's happening automatically. It starts to so I don't wait until things get bad to start turning on my coping mechanisms. But yeah, Roz and Mimi, any thoughts?
I think that's the right thing to do. I can't do that. For me personally, I have to wait till it's really above a threshold and my stress bucket is pretty full, and then it's like it grabs my attention, and then I think, okay, now I need to do something about it. Your way is better, but any way is better than no way.
Mm, okay. So use whatever triggers you've got going. Mimi, any thoughts on that? What do you do?
I would say I'm not a super stressed person in general. So if I'm feeling stressed, then it's like we're near the top of the bucket anyway. But I also think it's quite helpful to see how other people react to stress. So if you're like seeing like your peer, for example, kind of go through something and you can kind of relate to what they're doing and you see how they react and when they react, I think the timing is key. It's interesting to see whether they react like sooner or later than you would. And you can kind of like learn from what triggered them to react. And should I be, moving my like base case reaction earlier because that's when they did, and kind of use them as a measure. I think, again, always using your peers as like a marker or just as a support system is always super helpful. And I think that is the benefit of being in like large corporations, large firms, is that there's just so many people around you. You can kind of like look around and see, am I the first, like, when does my stress bucket get filled up faster, or people, flagging things earlier? Like, it's just interesting to kind of use that as a measure and see if you can start, turning your tap off or on even a bit
Yeah.
earlier in the process, so you're like, saving yourself a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Early is good. Early is good. There's one final question and then I'm gonna sign off. It's high performing firms come with a lot of pressure and fees, and growth can sometimes feel like it comes before employee well-being. What do I do if I'm not getting the support I need from my manager, HR, or partner? And so I think if we just think back about what we've been talking about, I think it's clearly defining what the problem is. And if that immediate manager, I'm framing and going to that potentially manager or HR with framing the problem and a constructive solution. If that isn't working, I think it's thinking about whether there's anyone else in the business that you can talk to about that. And there will be other people in the business. So potentially another partner that you've been working with on a different piece of work, someone that you've worked with before in a different seat. Maybe going, if you have mental health first aiders, mental health champions in the business, going to them and asking them for advice because they will be trained to give wellbeing advice in the context of the workplace. So I think it is not to give up and sit in silence, because that's not going to be good for you. That'd be my advice. If anyone has anything to add.
Yeah, totally echo it. I think across firms you get contact with lots of different people of different seniorities, and if you're not getting the support you feel that you need from the people you've already spoken to, then I think there's always more people to speak to, and you should just continue speaking about it. And also, even just talking to people at your own level and your colleagues, that can also help, because sometimes you just need someone to sit by you almost as you go to someone who's more senior. So I think, again, just gathering support and keep talking to people, because there will be someone within the company, whether it be like a speak up mentor or like a wellbeing mentor, who can help with these difficult conversations.
Brilliant. Thank
I would
you.
just add though that Mimi's point about actually they may not care about you, they may not be lovely people in the real world, but they have invested a lot of money in you. And actually, there's an economic argument and a productivity argument to look after your mental health, as well as a kind of moral and social and ethical argument.
100%. 100%. Both arguments both arguments play out, don't they? On that note, I told everyone I was going to end earlier than I have, so we have run on. But hopefully I've given people, you're not running straight on to the next meeting. But thank you so much to everyone that's joined. Thanks so much to Professor Roz, to Mimi for joining and sharing your insights and your thoughts. I really am grateful, and I hope that this conversation has helped to really just emphasize how important it is to be thinking about our well-being in the context of a career, and how we can take constructive action and prioritize our well-being. If you have any questions, then please do get in touch. We'll be sending out an email to everyone that registered. But for now, I'm going to close the session. Thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.